I have the pleasure of introducing the next speaker, who will be offering her remarks from the perspective of New York City. Penny Abeywardena is the Commissioner for International Affairs in the City of New York. Let me just give you two minutes on Penny, and then she can give her remarks. Penny leads the city's global platform for promoting its goals for a more just and inclusive society, showcasing the diversity that is New York City. She is in a position to accent and accelerate and amplify what the city's doing in terms of its policies and practices, and trying to share those actions with other cities and governments. She serves on several boards. She's part of the United Nations Development Cooperation. She's also on the International Advisory Council for International Peace Institute, which is based in New York. She is a co-chair of the Global Futures Council on Cities and Urbanization of the World Economic Forum. And she's also a core member of the United Nations Sustainable Development Strategy and Action Hub, which is based in New York. So she's wearing a lot of hats that are a bit different than your average commissioner in New York of a city, and especially in New York. And I just, on a personal note, want to recognize Penny's work. She has really lifted that office from where it was before to a point where it's doing more than just looking at how to keep the New Yorkers happy when there's a big General Assembly meeting and the city crowds out and there are lots of people taking up parking space. This is usually the method, unfortunately, that a lot of New York City commissioners have to deal with because of the perception of the UN. She's changed that to having a greater interface between the city government and what it's doing on sustainable development with the actions of the international community, and making sure that as the host city of the UN, she's putting the best foot forward for the city. So with those opening remarks, Penny, welcome.
Thank you so much. First of all, the parking program is very important, and we still are very proud to implement that through my office. And first of all, everyone, good afternoon. Happy UN Day. Did you guys know today's UN Day? It is its 74th birthday, and New York City is very proud to be the host. But very seriously, thank you so much for having me here today. It really is incredible to be at this global symposium on sustainable cities and neighborhoods, to see the momentum that has happened since 2015, and the recognition of our voices is very exciting. So on behalf of Mayor Bill de Blasio, it's a pleasure to join you here today to share a little bit about New York City's leadership on localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to thank the University of Chicago, the Institute, UN Habitat, and Ford Foundation for putting together such a wonderful event. Now, we all know this. The role of cities are changing. This is mostly by necessity. We're living in a time when national leaders, not just here in the US, but around the world, are actively abdicating their responsibilities on issues ranging from climate action to migration, and it's to all of our detriment. And we also know these statistics. Around the globe, cities are growing at the fastest pace in decades. Statistics that show by 2030, more than 60% of people worldwide will live in cities. That number jumps to more than 70% by 2050. Cities are also where the effects of climate change and the inequities that challenge our society are most often intensely felt. Our people are the ones on the front lines, and so it is our responsibility and our moral obligation to implement solutions that create a fairer, more sustainable future for everyone. The good news is that if you look around the world where national leadership is absent, cities are championing the values of fairness, inclusion, and cooperation on the global stage. Since day one, the de Blasio administration has been focused on city diplomacy and leadership, especially in the areas of climate action and poverty eradication. Let's take the Paris Climate Agreement, for example. Within 24 hours of the Trump administration pulling the US from this historic deal, Mayor de Blasio signed an executive order committing New York City to the goals and principles of the agreement. We have been actively working with the US Conference of Mayors to have other municipalities do the same. To date, 420 U.S. cities have now signed on to We Are Still In, the movement to ensure that cities and states and institutions around this country continue to strive toward a 1.5-degree goal. But New York City is not just about climate action. We're also about climate accountability. After committing to divest billions in our city pension funds from fossil fuel companies, New York City teamed up with the City of London along with the C40 to create the first ever Divest Invest Forum to help cities around the globe follow suit. To date, 15 global cities have signed up to participate in this forum, and we continue to work with more cities to build momentum. Now, that word momentum is key. No matter our size or region, as cities, we know we need to come together and flex our collective muscles. And there's growing acknowledgement about the value we bring to the table. In fact, last week I went to Washington, D.C. and met with Representative Ted Lieu's office. They are working on a bill to establish an Office of Subnational Diplomacy at the State Department, which would support local officials seeking to engage with foreign governments on issues that matter, from economic development to exchanging best policy ideas. And when it comes to the SDGs, or the global goals, as I like to say, I think Yvonne always reminds me that we shouldn't SDG-size things too much. So I want to global goals it a little bit better. Leaders from the highest echelons of the UN to the most respected think tanks agree that the goals cannot be achieved without help from local and regional governments. That's why gatherings like this are so important. In New York City, we have the unique privilege of hosting the largest diplomatic corps in the world. We have the United Nations, but we also have 193 permanent missions, 116 consulates, and over 70 trade missions. My agency over the years has worked to foster positive relationships, encourage collaboration between the international community, city agencies, and most importantly, our local neighborhoods. And this relationship has helped position us to amplify the voices of local and regional governments while making the link between local and global issues. After the UN adopted the 17 goals, what my team decided to do was map the synergies with One NYC. So in April 2015, the mayor launched our development agenda for New York City. And if you've been following New York City politics, Mayor de Blasio is very progressive. And when we looked at how we wanted to take on sustainability and resiliency, we did it with a very strong equity lens. And so looking at our sweeping sustainability plan that is focused on reducing poverty and protecting our people from climate change and other things, what we recognized is that we had synergies with all of the 17 global goals. It's not surprising that our goals overlapped with the global community. So what was important for us was to create a platform, which we did. It's called Global Vision Urban Action, to share solutions and exchange best practices beyond borders. As Yvonne and others say, it is about how we best accelerate our ideas. And since 2015, the SDGs have provided the critical framework and common language to move towards these solutions and impact. Now, through this platform, we have sponsored a series of high-level events at the UN to reinforce the synergies between our local agenda and the global goals. For example, we partnered with the World Health Organization and member states to share New York City strategies on tackling mental health challenges, which is a key component of SDG 3, which is around good health and well-being. Last spring, we invited UN and mission experts to take a trip on a sludge vessel. That was so much fun, actually, which is operated by the city's Department of Environmental Protection, to learn how our city treats liquid sludge and provides clean water for 8.6 million New Yorkers. These site visits have proven to be a wonderful opportunity for our city employees and experts to connect with their international counterparts. Now, this engagement on policy has been critical to our ability to further New York City's agenda and exchange these best practices. But at the end of the day, the people that matter the most are our citizens, our New York City taxpayers. They also need to care about why we are committed to connecting and working with the global community and the global goals. And we knew that to reach the everyday New Yorker, it was about how best are we going to activate our youth. And so in 2015, my agency launched the New York City Junior Ambassador Program, where we empower 12 to 13-year-olds in all of our 5 boroughs to actively learn about the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a competition where we ask educators to integrate an SDG into their curriculum. The winning classrooms get a whole series of activities, given that we are host to the UN. And, you know, at the end of the day, the most important thing about this program is that these kids have to take what they learn about being in a global movement and do something in their community. So one of my favorite examples is SDG 14, Life Underwater. To a 12-year-old, that can sound pretty darn boring. But really, when they learned about plastics in oceans and all of the different efforts that are happening around the world, we had a cohort that committed themselves to cleaning up the South Bronx River, one of New York City's dirtiest waterways. And there's nothing that can take these global goals and bring it home quite like young people activating in their community. Now, we know that cities can be vanguards for change, no matter our size or region. We reflect the needs of our communities, whether it's the impacts of climate change or the solutions to tackling poverty. That's why we needed to take our successes and challenges and issues outlined by the global goals directly to the United Nations. And we saw an opportunity, I'm not sure how many people know about the High-Level Political Forum that happens every year at the UN, but this is really when foreign ministers and other leaders from government come to do the groundwork before the UN General Assembly. And during this period, national governments are invited by the UN to submit what's called a voluntary national review. And many countries have. We just saw and knew that this US government was not going to, and so we saw an opportunity to create what is called a voluntary local review, a tool by which local governments can report directly to the UN about their challenges and their successes on achieving the goals. And it's really not a report; it's more a tool. It's part of a movement to ensure that these local government voices are at the UN. And what was really wonderful is that we got the endorsement of the UN Secretary General as well as other senior officials. And in summer 2018, we became the first city in the world to submit a voluntary local review reporting directly to the UN on our local progress achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think what's really important here, because I gave it in the context of recognizing that the Trump administration wouldn't do a voluntary national review, is that this is not an exercise to undermine or usurp member state sovereignty with the UN. We are just part of a larger holistic effort that includes community organizations, the private sector, to ensure that the global goals are achieved. And so for the last 2 years, we presented some of New York City's most innovative programs during the High-Level Political Forum, highlighting efforts like our commitment to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and also creating more affordable apartments to house 300,000 New Yorkers by 2026. We've also been very transparent about reporting what isn't working. Again, this is an exercise to ensure that we are sharing where we are at and our ability to learn from other cities and states around the world. Now, this year, I'm really proud to share, it's become a movement. One of the first conversations that I had after we decided to do a voluntary local review was with the mayor of Helsinki. He saw the opportunity that it could bring for Helsinki and their ability to showcase what is working there. I will tell you, in Finland, they are the happiest people in the world, so there's a lot of good things that are working there. But he wanted to be part of this movement, and what was really great is they became the first city in Europe, but the second city in the world to submit a voluntary local review. And what has been, I think, a beautiful partnership is that the government of Finland, the ambassador to Finland at the UN, they have really celebrated what it means for their local governments to showcase what they're doing locally on the Sustainable Development Goals. Earlier this year, they invited me to address a national summit of their mayors to talk about this voluntary local review. So a really great, I think, example of seeing how national governments are also embracing this work. Now, with this movement, what we've really decided we need is to create the momentum to activate and empower local and regional governments, no matter the size or the region. So this UN General Assembly that happened a couple of weeks ago, we launched the New York City Declaration. The recognition is that not all cities are going to be able to right away sign up and do a voluntary local review. There is a good amount of internal processes that needs to be addressed, and you saw the mayor of Freetown talk about the way that she first did her work as she came in to address the issues that she had in her community, and then how she connected that to the SDGs. And so what we wanted to do was ensure that there was this declaration that asked people to do 3 things, and I have a copy of the declaration if anybody is interested in it. But it is essentially committing to map what you are doing in your community to the SDGs. Again, this is about a common framework, common language for us to be able to exchange best practices to accelerate solutions. But we also are asking that at some point you are taking this to your community. You don't have to start a junior ambassador program, but your community needs to understand and know why it is important for the work that you are doing locally to be part of a global movement. And the last is that when a city or a town's internal processes have come together, that they will submit a voluntary local review to the UN. And the most important part about that is that we've kept the barrier of entry very low. To do a voluntary local review, it is not critical to add staff, have hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's really about rethinking and reallocating existing resources, as well as really securing strategic partnerships, which is the way New York City did our voluntary local review. So much of our success has been our work with our city agency partners, essentially working with them to recognize the importance of thinking about their work as part of a global movement and why they want to think of the SDGs as a framework, because it allows them to connect with their counterparts internationally in a more strategic way. Then we have the Junior Ambassador Program, but again, all of this has been reallocation of existing resources and creative partnerships. And so, just to conclude, this being a movement has been really important to have, to have Freetown, to have Kazan, Russia, to have Orlando, Florida, be part of this. We are right now in a moment where it is an extraordinary opportunity for cities to show how we can flex our collective global influence. We are actively trying to take a seat at the table, and it is not just for a moment right now, but really with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the kind of impact that we need to have on climate change and on poverty eradication. Local government leadership needs to be showcased, it needs to be listened to, it needs to be celebrated. And I call on the City of Chicago to join us, and I look forward to working with all of you to ensure that that happens. So thank you.
We're going to indulge Penny just for 15 minutes or so to any questions that people have, thoughts, what her comments have inspired, links to Chicago, links to some of the global work that we're doing here. The floor is open. If people would like to direct a question, I think there's a mic right over there if somebody'd like to touch some of the points that she's raised.
No pressure if that was just like a super detailed. Jeannie, are you?
The mic.
Oh, did she? He's actually, no.
Thank you very much, Penny, for that very comprehensive coverage. I'm Jeanne Birch from the University of Pennsylvania, and I've watched this very closely and really admire the work that New York City's done. They won the Guangzhou Prize for that work and other recognition. So what I'm wondering is, you'll have a lot of cities that will do this independently, but how will you agglomerate those cities within a nation so that that data can be brought up to the top for member state reviews?
So that's going to be, that is one of the conversations that we're having. I will say we have partners like Brookings that are actively trying to think and work with us on how best, with the voluntary national reviews, there's no standardized approach or data that the UN is expecting from national governments. So again, the SDGs just had its 5-year anniversary 3 weeks ago during the UN General Assembly. The voluntary local review is just a little over a year old, and we are still in the process of figuring out how best to bring all that data together within country and then get it to the member states. But right now, we're in the moment of PR and marketing and branding to work with cities to recognize that they even need to do that original mapping of what their local work is to the SDGs. So I think you're at step 5 and we're still at step 2. But go ahead.
So I'd like to encourage you to do this because so many
Yeah.
member states don't consider urban
I know.
issues important.
Yeah.
And so to the degree that you can hasten your thinking about this would be really terrific for the need to make cities more powerful.
No, absolutely, and I don't disagree with that, and I think some of the work also has to be done with at the member state level, right? Again, I gave the example of Finland. There are a number of other countries that are willing to work with their cities to get that information. It's just about how we both are getting cities on board as well as getting the member states. So we're trying to activate on both, but you're absolutely right, time is of the essence.
Yeah, we have another comment here, and then Rose, I think, had her hand up. But just to jump in between on this, to address Jenny's question, there's a lot happening in this space. I was very encouraged to hear from Penny that Congressman Ted Lieu has initiated some...
It's a bipartisan bill, actually, with a
Okay.
Republican Representative
Good.
Joe Wilson.
So getting that as part of State Department, which traditionally has been dealing with member states and the international community through intergovernmental processes, getting them to recognize is, I think, an important step for whatever administration we see in the United States in the future. Also, in a number of cities, the mayor that is taking this on, or considering taking this on, the mayor of Bonn is a good example in Germany, is also the head of the National Association of Local and Regional Governments. That has a huge impact in terms of what you're saying, Jeanne, that the ability to roll that out across the country and look at these data questions in terms of influencing voluntary national reviews. Yes, you had your hand up, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Just state your name,
yes, I need
please,
to say.
and
Patty Romero Lancao. I'm a research scientist with the National Renewable Energy Lab and the University of Chicago's Mansueto Institute. I have a reflection and a sort of reflection of question. No matter how hard we all have been trying to do our homework, decision makers, trying to address the myriad challenges we face, and scientists trying to create data, right, to inform or to analyze those actions, we still have a super long way to go because our commitment does not translate in outcomes, right? Like, we are still faced with inequality, climate change, 12 years to go to wherever we want to go. So my question to all of us, my reflection is, what is what we need to do differently to address these challenges? Or do we think that by continue on the current trajectory, we'll get there? And it's a question that I share with everyone because I'm hallucinating around that.
No, absolutely, and that's a big question, and it's an important question, and I can tell you what we're doing here in New York City, and sort of how the reason I am standing here. When I was appointed 5 years ago, I would never think that I'd be at the University of Chicago talking about this topic. The reality is, when I came in, it was thinking about how can we best exchange sort of ideas beyond the border with other cities and states from a New York City perspective, given that we get to host this amazing diplomatic corps. We built a reputation and built a trusted partnerships with the UN and our consular corps, but the reality was political, right? When the Trump administration came, there is really nobody that is representing the issues that are touched on by the Sustainable Development Goals. I gave the example of the Paris Climate Agreement, but in 2018, the UN community was focused on the Global Compact on Migration. This government our government wasn't going to touch it. And so we were part of a coalition of 50 international cities that said, we need to be at the UN talking about the realities of how we are integrating migrants into our community. We don't control the borders. We understand why this is a member state conversation, but at the end of the day, we're the ones that need to ensure that our new neighbors are interacting with the NYPD in a dignified manner, as well as having access to our education and health systems, right? And so there has just been, so for us to be here right now, talking about a voluntary local review, talking about the power of cities to get action around climate change, around migration, around gender equity, this is that urgency, and this is a reflection of that urgency from my perspective and from New York City's perspective.
Thanks very much. Rose, Mike, you just stand up so they can bring it to
Do you know what I'm noticing? All the women are asking me questions.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
What's up with that?
Huh? All the men asked the previous panel. Hi.
Yes, Rose, just tell us who you are and what you do, and people don't know you. Not everybody knows you're here, but they will. By Friday, they will know exactly who you are.
I'm Rose from South Africa, the member of the management committee of SDI. Mm-hmm. You will know me later in the afternoon. I heard you introducing her with many caps. I couldn't recall most of them. So I just want to understand whether some of your positions are acting internationally or only focusing in New York City. That's my first question. And then my second question, I had to talk mostly about the SDGs, mm-hmm. and then referring to what is happening in New York City. Mm-hmm. Because the SDGs are affecting every country around the world. Me representing the countries mostly at the southern part of the hemisphere. Is there any collaboration that New York City is having with some of the countries that I am representing? I'm just asking this because many times when I come to New York, I'm sorry to say that I don't see poverty. I see a beautiful city. And I said, what are they lacking? Why can't they share all these riches with my organization in the South? So I'm just checking on that. And the final issue, the American president, I heard him on television saying he is not in agreement with what we all talking about climate change. So I want to know the response of the New York City people towards this, whether we are agreeing with him or how do we act in convincing him and making him to change his mindset to understand that we like it or not, climate change is here, yes, and it is acting.
So those are a lot of questions. Yeah. I'm going to hit the first one first.
Let me just interrupt before Penny starts. Unfortunately, that is the last question we can take because of the program that we have. But definitely, this conversation is not over with this session. We'll carry it forward. Thanks.
Just in case the mayor's watching, my only job is with New York City as a commissioner for international affairs. That's the only thing I get paid for. All of the other affiliations that Chris mentioned are places where I take our agenda around localizing the sustainable development goals, New York City leadership on different issues, but it is my representation in spaces like the World Economic Forum or other, or UN Habitat, but that is what those affiliations are. So, and I'm gonna, just because it's fresh in my head and I had talked about it, New Yorkers and most Americans do not agree with the Trump administration on climate change. In New York City, we suffered Superstorm Sandy a couple of years ago, which had $1 trillion of economic impact, as well as we had about 70 or 75 people who died from that. So we understand the impact of climate change, and that is why he didn't just say that he doesn't agree with it, he actively pulled the U.S. government out of this landmark deal that 193 countries participated in. And New York City, within 24 hours, signed ourselves in an executive order committing ourselves directly to it. Then we used our voice and partnered with other cities around the United States to ensure that they were also still in. This was a bipartisan effort, and there are 400 in US cities that have signed a pact called We Are Still In. So, I'm not gonna curse because we are in these hollowed walls, but New Yorkers, you guys can just imagine what New Yorkers are saying to Trump about climate change. And You know, I also want to reflect on what you said when you visit New York City. That is sadly not true. You know, when the mayor first ran, his campaign was about the tale of two cities. And that is a humility in which we show up to the conversation. If you go to parts of our 5 boroughs, whether it's East New York, South Bronx, there are real challenges. And part of the way that we show up at the UN and in global conversations is that, yes, we are big. We're 8.6 million people. We are as large, from a population perspective, we are as large, if not larger, than 141 countries. But we are also not the island of Manhattan. We show up with the humility to learn from our colleagues and counterparts throughout throughout the globe, including the Global South. I will say that Cape Town, South Africa, is part of the Voluntary Local Review. They're part of the original class that signed three weeks ago. And I, want to say that these exchanging of best ideas, we have delegations that are constantly coming in to New York. Usually during the UN General Assembly, but throughout the year, and we're constantly connecting them to our experts in New York City. We want to share our ideas, but we also want to learn from them as well, and so that's why I gave the example of the sludge vessel, et cetera. But that conversation is actively happening, and it's not just New York City with other big cities or states. We are purposefully looking for good ideas from any region or size.
Can you welcome me in giving Penny a round of applause? Two housekeeping messages. I'll make one, and then Anne will make the other. The first one is that you will see that there are boxes on each